At 25, I started looking for a house to rent. After a long search, I finally found a nice older home that fit perfectly within my budget. There was another man interested in renting it, but fortunately, I was first in line, so the house was mine. I have always lived with my parents, so I didn't have too much furniture to bring to my new place. But the move was still more work than I expected. Throughout the day, I unpacked my stuff and placed it in the appropriate rooms. When it started to get dark, I decided to put together my bedroom closet. This was the last thing I was going to put together for this evening. While I was busy putting the cabinet together, a loud bang came from downstairs. My heart skipped a beat. I immediately jumped up, startled by the unexpected sound. I am alone here, I thought. Wary, I went downstairs to see what was going on, but found nothing wrong except a toppled box. I wondered how it had fallen, probably from the wind, I thought. I knocked it off and went back upstairs to finish the last task of the evening. After a long time, I'd finished assembling the cabinet. Just as I was about to lie down in my bed for a rest, suddenly the light went out. With a strange feeling, I tried to turn the light back on, but it didn't work. I checked to see if my cell phone, which I had plugged in, was still charging. But no, that didn't work either. I then realized that the power had gone out. I felt uncomfortable. Something wasn't right. I grabbed the flashlight from my cell phone and walked slowly and quietly down the stairs toward the power panel, intending to get the power back on. As I walked down the stairs and came around the corner, I froze. There was a man standing in the doorway of the kitchen. A man dressed all in black stood there. He looked at me in my eyes, but did not do or say anything. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was just waiting for something to happen. With a slow movement, the man quietly closed the kitchen door and disappeared from my sight. I stood there paralyzed, trying to realize what had just happened. Eventually, I managed to put my fear aside and get moving again. I ran as fast as I could to the electricity panel. With shaking hands, I turned on everything that was turned off, and the light turned on. I hurried back to the kitchen and searched the entire house, but there was no sign of the man. I ran back to my room, locked my door, and called the police. Police arrived several minutes later and conducted a thorough search of the entire house. But there was no evidence of the man's presence. I was completely over my head and did not dare to sleep in the house alone, so I decided to spend the night at my parents' house. For a very long time, I felt that the man was still watching me. My friends tried to reassure me and attributed the incident to a bad joke, or that someone was just trying to scare me. I installed security cameras and extra locks on the doors, trying to better secure my new home against intruders. But no matter what precautions I took, the feeling of being watched remained. A few weeks later, I was almost asleep in bed when I heard a noise that immediately gave me flashbacks. It was not my imagination. Someone was trying to open my back door. Memories of the previous time this happened came back and scared me. Despite my attempts to move on, the man didn't seem to stop. He came back. My heart raced as I listened to his persistent attempts to enter. It took 5 minutes until the attempts finally stopped. I was relieved to know that my extra security measures had kept him out this time, but the fear continued to haunt me day and night. I couldn't escape the feeling of vulnerability in my own home, wondering why this man was fixated on me and what his intentions were. I began to think about who would want to do this to me, but I didn't have any enemies. The only person who came to mind was the other interested person in the house, probably to try to scare me away, or worse, to harm me. The thought took hold of me and made me question my decision to move into the house. Despite my fears, I was determined not to let this person scare me away. I had wanted a house of my own for so long, and I refused to surrender it to an unknown person. A few months have passed, and I haven't experienced anything weird. I think and hope he has given up. I also feel a lot safer now, and can finally call it my home. Story 2. Creepy Neighbor. I was given a year by my parents to find a place of my own when I turned 19. This was because I had to learn to live independently, and it was time to stand on my own 2 feet. I thought this was a great idea. I could do whatever I wanted. After some searching, I found a small, affordable apartment complex with 10 units, one of which was still available. This was perfect as a first home of my own. I completed the paperwork and was allowed to move in after a month. When I walked into my new house, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was a cozy little apartment with a distinctive style, but I liked it, and that was the most important thing. Since I didn't have a lot of stuff, I quickly finished moving and was easily settled. I decided to sleep in the living room and to use the bedroom as an office to work on my personal projects. After setting everything up, the first few days went smoothly. The other tenants in the building seemed like friendly people with whom I occasionally had a little chat with in the hallway. But after a few days, I began to notice a strange man in the hallway. It was the man who lived in the apartment across from mine. He had a strange and scary look, and every time we crossed each other, I felt his gaze lingering on me. I did feel uncomfortable with him, but I didn't show it. I tried to shake off the weird feeling I was getting from him, but I remained cautious. I felt I had to be careful, so I became more vigilant when I was alone in the building. The strange events with my neighbor continued. Every time I stood in front of my door before entering, I would hear the peephole in his door opening and closing. It seemed like he was constantly watching me. Despite the disturbing experiences, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy and focused on getting used to my new life. One evening, as I was watching TV in the living room, I suddenly heard knocking on my door. I went to look through the peephole. To my surprise, it was the man from across the hall. He was standing there in the dark hallway. I opened the door and kindly said hello, without saying hello back. He asked if I had any butter left because he had run out of it. It seemed like an innocent question to me, but there was something strange about the situation. I walked to the kitchen to get the butter, but when I returned, he was gone. Confused and slightly suspicious, I knocked on his door, hoping to give him the butter, but there was no response. The door remained closed. I began to look around for him, but he had disappeared. I felt that something was wrong. As the rest of the day passed, I couldn't stop thinking about the strange event. It was as if I was being watched all the time. I tried to shake it off and went to sleep. At some point during the night, I woke up and heard something moving in the room. My heart was racing as I turned around, and there he was, the scary man from across the hall. He stood there silently in the living room. The dim light from the street lamp cast eerie shadows across his face, making him look even scarier. I was frozen in fear and couldn't understand how he had gotten into my apartment. I always close the door when I go to sleep. Panic coursed through me, and all I could think about was how to protect myself. Before I could gather my thoughts, he noticed that I had woken up. He tiptoed out of my apartment as quietly as possible. I was left terrified on the couch. My privacy had been violated. The strange man had simply invaded my home without shame. Determined to protect myself, I immediately called the police, who took immediate action and got there as soon as possible. The man was detained, and during interrogation, he told me that he had walked into my apartment and hid in the storage room when I had gone to get butter for him. The situation gave me chills all over my body, and I could not understand why I had not noticed that he had been present in my house all evening. It was very clear that I could no longer feel safe in my own apartment, so I made the decision to leave. I found comfort in the fact that the man had been arrested and would no longer be a threat to me. My departure from that apartment was a mixture of relief and fear, because this experience would haunt my mind forever. Story 3. Mansion Encounter. Moving to a new location can be very unsettling, which I didn't realize. In other words, as a 30-year-old man, all I'm trying to do is get by and create a life for myself. England appeared to be a new beginning and a clean slate. It was like a dream come true when I stumbled upon that historic mansion. I've always wanted to live in such a lavish setting and have my own personal castle. I then signed the papers and moved in because I had a sizable budget to support myself. I was worn out from carrying everything I owned into this magnificent old house. The best thing in the world appeared to be to take a quick nap. The day had been a marathon of heavy lifting and organizing, so I sank into my bed, closed my eyes, and drifted off to sleep. The dawn light flooded into my room as soon as I opened my eyes in the morning. I became aware that I hadn't eaten since breakfast when my stomach began to growl. I dragged myself out of bed and stumbled to the kitchen. But as I walked into that room, I had an odd feeling. A prickling sensation that screamed you're being watched. I turned around to see a man standing there, which gave me shivers. He was directly staring into my home from the street, and I could see him through the window. I had to strain my eyes to understand what I was seeing. I walked over to the window and squinted at the stranger, wondering if he was lost or thought my house belonged to someone else. He kept staring at me, though, and didn't move. To be polite, I closed the curtains. I held my breath and let my heart race for a moment before peeking again. As soon as he left, a wave of relief swept over me. I attributed it to a curious, if slightly strange, bystander. I shrugged off the odd encounter and ascended the rickety stairs to my bedroom. I crawled under the covers as fatigue began to pull at my limbs. I was engulfed in the depths of sleep, which came over me like a gentle embrace. Then the silence was broken by a loud ring. I felt sleepy and groggy when my eyes suddenly opened. The echo persisted and could be heard in all of the old rooms. I was having trouble identifying it as a phone because of my foggy mind. However, it wasn't just any phone. It was a landline, a relic of the past that I hardly knew how to operate. Half asleep, I stumbled downstairs, cursing my misfortune. I grabbed the receiver in an effort to block out the noise. I put the phone to my ear, and all I heard was breathing. Then I said in a trembling voice, "Hello." Again, I got no answer, just someone breathing into the phone. My lumbar region and veins tingled with anxiety as I was on the phone, and my fingers began to shake. I slammed the receiver to the ground out of a mixture of rage and fear. This nonsense is beyond what I could stand. I grabbed the old phone and ran back to my room, vowing never to let it surprise me again. Even so, it did. It rang once more, its sharp sound stabbing my nerves. While getting ready for questions, I reached for it. Then, a cold, calculated voice slithered through the line. "I'm waiting for you. Come downstairs." My veins were extremely chilly. I summoned the courage to tiptoe downstairs while clutching a glass bottle of water like it was a lifeline, wondering who this was. Was he in my house making fun of me, or was it some sick game or sick prank? As I got closer to the ground, the floorboards began to creak under my feet, and my heart began to beat against my ribs. Standing there, leaning his nose against the window, was the man with the menacing grin. I froze as fear overcame me. He was the same individual who earlier had been standing in the street, watching my sanctuary. I ran back upstairs, picked up the phone, and immediately dialed 911. They rushed in as the sirens sounded, and their presence soothed my frayed nerves. However, the stranger had already left, leaving nothing but a terrible feeling of having been mistreated. He had visited and invaded my privacy because only footprints could be seen in the yard, which proved he had done so. However, the unease persisted like a fog as time and life progressed. I lingered there, the memory of that strange encounter bothering me. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized the stranger had vanished. There won't be any more unsettling phone calls or ominous glances. I could never quite shake the feeling that someone was watching me, though. The creaks and shadows of that old mansion constantly reminded me of that horrible incident. My lavish mansion, which was once my ideal home, had changed into a terrifying place, with secrets hidden in every nook and cranny that I was unable to discern. As I moved through this enormous mansion, I constantly check behind me, because the image of that man and his menacing smile haunts me. I'm trapped in a state of uncertainty and paranoia in my lovely home, which has turned into a gilded cage.